Union of European Federalists. Welcome to the UEF Union of European Federalists podcast series. Is Europe on its way to finally become a federation? This is the question we'd like to discuss today. With us here are not one, not two, but three UEF presidents and experts on the matters of federalism and Europe. A very warm welcome to UEF President and Member of the European Parliament, Sandro Gozi.
Hello.
To Vice President of the European Parliament and President of the Europa Union Deutschland, which is the German section of UEF, Wieland. And to Member of the European Parliament and President of UEF Austria, Lukas Mandl.
Hello, everybody.
Great to have you here. Let's dive right into the topic, which is especially in Germany, a red-hot subject these days. Mr. Wieland, the brand new government coalition in Germany between SPD, Grüne and FDP made it very clear that one of their core goals in the upcoming years will be the transformation of the EU into a European federation. How did the coalition come to this conclusion that we need a European federation more than ever and right now?
Well, perhaps it's not my task and possibly also not my competence to give an interpretation what they have thought when they wrote this down. But I think it's important to see that we have a long tradition of pro-European parties which are more or less in the government, and so. Prima vista, it seemed to be good news. And if you look to the wordings of the different parties, in particular also to the election programs of the three governmental parties now, you see different wordings, different ideas, and now in the agreement, another time a new wording. So for Brussels, it might be a good news, prima vista, but the question is to which extent it's more than lyrics. And so the question is how many treaty changes we need, how far it is possible to build an avant-garde of member states, Koalition der Willigen. This is a bit will be a bit tricky, but it's very clear that this coalition stands in the long pro-European tradition of Germany, and if you look to the preamble of the German constitution, it's very clear that this is the birth consensus of the Federal Republic of Germany. To what extent the government now stresses the top candidate process and the transnational list. So on the second one, we will see what the council will comment on that. I mean, we did not have a parliamentarian voice asking for that up to now on the last round. So we haven't seen a reaction on that before the previous elections, so 2013. But we see now a clear commitment to the top candidate situation, and I want to painful recall by repeating quotes after the last European election in 2019. It was not my political family who objected the principle of the top candidate. I mean, this belongs more to other party families, to which the French president belongs to, who didn't accept the top candidate principle, and to others who believe that other people than the top candidate of the EPP has a majority in the parliament. But coming back, I think it's good news, and we have all, and I think the German opposition will offer support that we all try to come forward a bit more down that road, which the new coalition repeated to ask for.
Let's talk a bit more about the necessary legal changes. The German government coalition defined the next step towards the European Federation as a constituent convention, and it shall prepare the legal changes, such as the end of the principle of anonymity in the common foreign and security policy. However necessary these steps are, how realistic is it, in your opinion, that such legal changes that pave the way to a European Federation become reality in a Europe that seems to be slowly losing its coherence, if not to say its common values?
Well, I mean, the common values are in the treaty. We have to, possibly we have to color again the red lines, ring fencing, the field of action of the European Union. So these will not change, and we will have to work for that. If it comes down to new elements, where treaty changes are necessary, we have to carefully look what is in the interest of the different member states. And if we talk about climate change, if we talk about accession concerning the Balkans, if we talk about foreign policy, or if we talk about migration, possibly different countries say, yes, for that field, I want to have more majority decisions, and for others, they say, no, we would prefer to have to keep our position as a veto player on that and that game, on that or that field. So I think if we want to come to more majority decisions, I think it will be a challenging task to create a package where each country, or the sufficient amount of member states, can say, okay, there are some hard things hard to swallow, but there are more advantages in it than disadvantages. If we only go for one goal and look to 2 or 3 countries who say, concerning that issue, we are not so in favor, this possibly will not be enough, because transferring more things to the majority corner of the European field, we need unanimity, or at least countries who say, well, we are not so enthusiastic, but we are ready to sign. So this is the art. And if we look to the younger past, we very often see papers in the parliament where everybody is putting his favorite pet into the package. And a lot of people, not me, but a lot of people were surprised by the fact that the package was blocked by a qualified minority, and at the end of the day, the package was an empty box. This is not a sufficient behavior even in the parliament.
Thank you. Mr. Gozi, you're an Italian, but as true European, have a French seat within the European Parliament. France takes over the EU Council presidency in January 22. Will a European constitution or even a European federation be major concerns during France's presidency?
Certainly, what it will a major concern, the concrete issue which would go along with a federal idea. You know that the word federal and federalism has got a totally different meaning, perception. The meaning is the same, but the perception is totally opposite in Germany and in Austria, or in Italy and in Spain on one side, and in France on the other side. When you say federal in France, they think of a super centralized state which denies national and regional identities, which denies history, which is exactly the opposite of federalism. We have already got the chance to discuss what federalism is. Federalism is respect of pluralism, respect of diversities, respect of minorities, identification of the right level of governance, and also a governance under democratic supervision. These are the priorities of the French presidency. When the French President Emmanuel Macron talked about a sovereign and democratic Europe, it talks of something which is very close to the very idea of a federal union, because it talks about the need to take back control at European level on issues, on transnational issues, on issues on which the nation states are powerless. Let's think about a broader concept of security, fight against global crimes, management, proper and efficient management of migration, the climate challenges, the digital challenges, the space policy, which by definition cannot be run by one single state. I mean, these are all the issues which are also what we call upon as federalists to be done in Europe, and that they fall within the concept of sovereign Europe. Also the development of a truly European industry in key sectors such as defense, health, pharmaceutical sectors. I mean, these are all issues which go along with the idea of sovereignty, but it must be democratic. And the issue that we have already mentioned in this discussion, the issue of getting rid of the veto, because the veto is the denial of existence for the Union, because the Union exists through its action. The Union exists through concrete solutions that it brings along the action of the state or the regions. And the veto paralyzes the Union. So we have to extend the qualified majority. We have to get rid of the veto. That can be done partially using better the treaty we have, partially also with treaty revision, not abuse. And so this is a part of European democracy. We want to strengthen the power of the European Parliament, to recognize the European Parliament a real power of legislative initiative, like any parliament national level. This also can be done both, I mean, by better using the treaty we have and by revising the treaty. We need both. And also the issue that my friend Rainer Wieland already mentioned of the transnational list. We are strongly convinced, and also the French presidency is convinced that this is part of the answer to the need for a stronger democracy. It is not the only answer. There are many issues. The issue of the power of the European Parliament, the issue of concrete solutions in key issues, but in key fields, but also the idea of building up truly European political parties and European political movement. We have to do it by giving a direct legitimacy to this movement, and we strongly believe that this legitimacy can be done only through a direct vote of the citizens. And of course, if we do this, the French presidency is also open to discuss the issue of the head of the list. So, I mean, if there are the list, there can be also the head of the list. I always say, no list and no head of the list. Like, I I know we are not George Clooney, but you say no Martini, no party, you know, in his advertisement. So we say no head of the list if there are in the list. But if we have the list and we can vote the list directly, certainly, I mean, the issue of the so-called Spitzenkandidat, I mean, the head of the list, it is certainly something which will come in the picture and will come as part of the compromise. And I'm strongly convinced that all these issues can be done pretty quickly if we push as European parliamentarians, because there is a new convergence between France, Germany, Italy, probably also the new government in the Netherlands. I mean, there is an evolution and they're willing of finding new compromise, but I agree with Rainer, it depends also about on the position, the clear position that the European Parliament will take on these issues, and certainly also on the transnational list issue.
I hear a lot of hope. I hear a lot of constructive, positive, good ideas. Let's talk a bit more about what could hinder and block them to become reality. Former EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker's white paper on the future of Europe, you remember, it presented 5 scenarios at that time, depending on the willingness of how much the deepening of the European integration is really wanted, especially by the European citizens. It showed at that time that it was unclear how much of a common Europe the member states really wanted. The situation didn't change much in the last year. On the contrary, the pandemic opened doors for autocratic leaders and for a division of the society even more than before. So do you think, Mr. Gozi, that fights over most sensitive issues such as migration or anti-democratic developments in some EU countries will block the becoming of a European federation in the end?
There are certainly new warring divisions within the Union, and there are certainly new cleavages and tensions with some governments, such as the Hungarian government and the Polish government. I think that on one side, we have to use all the instruments we have to ensure that everybody play by the rules of the club. On the other side, I don't think that only sanctions, it cannot be only a question of sanction and of freezing funds. We have to put on the table the fundamental issues of what does it mean being members of a democratic union? What does it mean being members of a union based on rule of law and fundamental freedoms? And this is something that cannot be solved only by sanctioning and by, arm twisting, which unfortunately are very necessary. So, there is a fundamental issues of democracy. What does it mean as supranational democracy? And how we are ready to defend our supranational democracy. And on the other side, I disagree with, sorry, Anna, with the part of your question, but I disagree also with my friend Jean-Claude Juncker, in the sense that if you look at the opinion polls, if you look at what we call the Eurobarometer, which is this opinion poll done at European level, if you look also at the beginning of the works of the conference, the Future of Union, where there are 800 citizens randomly selected from 27 countries who already met several times in the weekend to discuss about Europe, I do not sense this rejection of indifference about Europe. Of course, they ask Europe to solve the issue of health, to solve the issue of climate, to fight against inequalities. There is also generational expectations, especially from younger people. There are divisions on migration, but there is, I would say, a general awareness of the fact that there are some problems that we have to tackle together at European level. So, certainly there is a growing awareness of the fact that Europe is part of our political debate, that Europe is part of our societal debate. And on one side, we have warring divisions, as I say, between government, between political parties within the Union. On the other side, we have, after the pandemic, a scenario where we can move ahead if we listen to the citizens and if we bring up if we work on a double track. The first track is concrete solutions on health, on growth, on migration, on borders. On the other side, perspective of a new democratic dimension and perspective of a more efficient European governance. This is something that is being debated in the Conference of the Future of Union, and is something on which we don't have to be naive, and we don't have to be superficially optimistic. We must be determined, and we must be determined and show the proper right determination to change things in a moment of global changes.
Yeah, Mr. Mandl, Germany and France, they seem to take up the opportunity of the currently running Conference of the Future of Europe to try to reform the EU. Austria is often one of those countries on seemingly the other side of the spectrum, making a point of the member state sovereignty. As a European federalist, you might have argued a lot with politicians opposing the idea of a truly political European Union. What arguments do you use to convince those skeptics or even opponents of the necessity of a deeper European integration process?
Thank you for this direct question, and thanks for the opportunity to also speak. But I'm really, really happy to listen to my colleagues and our president in UEF and our vice president in the European Parliament. Well, I have to convince both sides, obviously, because the picture is wrong. Austria is a driving force of a united Europe and of a proper European integration, or as I would say, and I always put it that way, I'm, as an Austrian parliamentarian from Austria, also a true European, I'm fighting for Europe with more strength to the outside and more freedom to the inside. And this is exactly what federalism is about. And Sandro Gozi has made a lot of points defining federalism exactly that way and clearing up with some misunderstandings about the term of federalism. I can only underline and emphasize what Sandro Gozi already has stated here. And of course, if people doubt that European integration would be a good project, there are opportunities to convince them by example, by facts and figures, and I would say also by destiny. And what I mean is the example of the United States of America, not meaning that we should copy that. Of course not. Europe, the European Union, is a body of sui generis, or sui generis, as it is mentioned. There is no example in history nor in recent times for what the European Union would be or is about. We have to develop it, and we have inherited today's European Union from the generations before, and they have achieved a lot. So it's a huge responsibility we have to develop the European Union for the future. And the example of the United States of America is the one that this body is strong to the outside, but even more free to the inside, as we sometimes realize and understand on the European side. So everything Sandro Gozi has stated about subsidiarity and about opportunities on each and every level to decide is given in the United States of America anyway. It's clearly federalistically organized. And that's also what will be important for the future of Europe. And I can only underline what our Vice President Rainer Wieland has already stated, that the whole issue of unanimous votes have to be overcome by what? By unanimity. And this is the paradox here about it. It's clear there is no other way, but it's paradox that to overcome what is hindering us from speaking with one voice to the outside, from becoming a more strong Europe, requires exactly the thing that's hindering us to overcome that. So we have to work on that. The example of the United States shows a clear picture what federalism can be about. Secondly, facts and figures, especially about the internal market, which is not only about economy, while economy is extremely important for wealth and for opportunities and for proper living and dwelling, but the internal market is much more than economy. It's about freedom, it's about free movement, it's not only for goods and services, of course, but for people in the first place. And it's the thing that made Europe strong. Even people who criticize the European Union structures a lot have no doubt, or at least cannot convey any doubt about the sense and the meaning of the internal market. So facts and figures about what the European Union has achieved, what generations before us have achieved. Not a structure, not an institution, not an anonymous body has achieved that, but generations, people, our parents and grandparents have achieved a lot in Europe, and facts and figures show that it's worth it to develop it for the future. And yeah, this leads me to the third point, destiny. Famous Austrian states representative, statesperson, foreign minister, and other positions he covered, Alois Mock, always claimed that Europe would be our destiny. And that's clear. That's clear for Austrians, especially because we are right in the center of the continent, located geographically. We are affected by everything that happens to our continent. So we have to involve ourselves in everything that is decided on the level of Europe, on the EU level. And it's also true for each and every European. Europe is our destiny. Europe is, so to speak, the vessel, the Europeans, the people who live here, are going on through the ocean of geopolitics, of the world, of history. So that's why EU is our destiny, and that's why our involvement in European Union and the proper structure of European Union, a federalistic structure, strength to the outside and freedom to the inside, are so important. Subsidiarity remains an important principle, and it's connected with the principle of federalism. There is a clear understanding of what to do in order to organize a federalist state, and there's a lot of Austrian contribution to that project. And I hope for all the 24 other member states that it's not only Germany and France who develop Europe, but it's 27 member states who do that.
Thank you. Yeah, let's come to the next steps that are necessary. What do you think is the most important step to take to achieve a really sovereign Europe? Is it all about taking smaller steps like strengthening the European Parliament bit by bit, or is it time for real big leaps like the European Constitution, perhaps?
My approach is clear, and I'm sticking on that very much. And I will strengthen the work on that in the year 2022. We clearly need a new EU treaty. And again, talking about generations, the generation before us in politics really was brave and has managed to achieve a lot, united Europe, the East and the West, and overcame so many obstacles from the past. So the generation before us has done its job. Our generation, sorry to convey that message to all my colleagues, but it's true for myself as well, our generation has not yet achieved what is important and necessary and mandatory, I would say morally mandatory and essential for the Europeans. And that's a different structure. And the different structure is made on EU level by a new EU treaty. Of course, it could also be in constitution theoretically, but practically we know that constitution will not work due to reasons we already know. We can talk about that as well. But a new EU treaty would be what we need, because the Lisbon Treaty is outdated by far for many different reasons, in many different respects. It was before the finance crisis, before the migration crisis, before the era of digitalization, especially in terms of artificial intelligence, before the uprising of China, before the, I would say, also the era of aggression or at least confrontation by other parts of the world. Not only the Chinese leadership is seeking for that, but also the Russian one, the Turkish one, and others. It was before the era of what we call hybrid aggression and hybrid attacks. So there are many, many good reasons for a new EU treaty, especially the structural reasons about unanimity and others we have already talked about. So my approach is clearly that if they are responsible state persons, as we had in the past on the European level, from Václav Havel to Helmut Kohl, from François Mitterrand to Lech Wałęsa and others, and many others, we had this generation. So we need a generation of brave decision takers, ladies and gentlemen, women and men who take the right decisions today. And we as parliamentarians in European Parliament, and we as federalists, as a civil society movement all over Europe, we have to push for that. And it's time for a new EU treaty.
So my final question goes to all of you, and it's about the time that comes once the federal Europe is there. Please just tell us your personal vision. What will be different once we have a European federation? Mr. Wieland, if you would like to start.
Well, allow me to tell you that possibly it's the other way around. What has to be different to have a European federation? And for me, it's very clear that a behavior which more or less says no sacrifice is too large for me, which others are bringing for me, this is not sufficient anymore. Everybody has to contribute first. The second is we have a number of crucial issues where the sovereignty of the member states is only on the paper of their national constitutions. And I believe that we have to write this sovereignty to a European paper and giving it up on the national paper in order to get real sovereignty back, used by all in common, in order to have a sovereignty to create, a sovereignty to act, and not only something on paper, which is there, still there on paper, but not anymore in the reality. And the third, I think we need strong, profiled and confident patriotism in each member state. And this is not a contradiction to European patriotism. Nobody has an interest on a more German or more French or more Italian or more Austrian Europe, but we need all a more European Germany, France, Italy and Austria. And this is the precondition for a European federation I want to live in.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gozi. How do you envision a European federation? What will be different?
First of all, I fully agree with my friend Rainer. I always say that without European patriotism, we will never get the Europe we need, but we risk to lose also national patriotism.
No, nationalism. We lose nationalism, and the national patriotism is okay. Yeah.
No, we lose it, and we get nationalism. I mean, because the idea of in patrie nationale, in patrie européenne, to say it in proper English, they go together. They are not in opposition. The nationalist wants to put Europe and national patriotism in opposition. To nurture, to strengthen national patriotism, you also need a new dimension of European patriotism. And this is the link. This is our link. This is what makes people who have a different background, come from different countries, even belong different parties, like Lukas, Rainer, and myself, to be together and united in the fight for European federalism. But these are fundamental issues. This is much more important than divergence that we have on this or that economic or environmental or digital decision. You see what I mean? Here we are at the heart of the problem. Here we are at the heart of the societal debate, and we are at the heart of the big political and democratic question of our time. And this is why I repeat, European federalism is the best guarantee of national democracies, of regional identities, of minorities. And to me, what would we get? What do we need to get there? We need to regain mutual trust. We are doing better than in the past, but there is still much work to be done to regain mutual trust. That means that everybody must commit with commitment. Everybody must reform, because if you reform in one country, the rest of the union will benefit. Everybody must be ready to provide solidarity when there is one member which is in particular trouble for reasons which are not dependent on its own responsibility. We are doing that. We must do even better, but we are doing that, for example, with the health crisis. So we have to regain mutual trust. We have to be serious with our commitment. We have to be generous with our solidarity. The two goes hand in hand. If we do that, we will, with the federal union, we will get more power and more influence. We'll be more powerful as Europeans on the global scene, and we will be much more influential. And I think this is a battle which is worthwhile to fight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mandl. You mentioned the next generation. So how do you see their life once we have a European federation be different than now?
Well, it's really inspiring to listen to my colleagues first. Secondly, thank you for the question. First, I agree with Rainer Wieland that we have not to lose. So not everything has to change, but if we don't change something, things will change which we don't want to be changed first. Secondly, I guess we will be more patriotic on a European level if we have more leverage on the geopolitical level. If Europe will have more leverage, if Europe will be less dependent on parts of the world which do not share our values, which actually oppose our values. then we will be in the position to have a clearer understanding of what Europe is about and what our role as Europeans would be, and how privileged we can feel to be European citizens. And with this privilege, also a lot of responsibility comes along. And again, we will have more leverage to carry out this responsibility on a global scale if we will be stronger to the outside and have a more clear language, this new EU treaty, a federalistic structure, and so on. So these are things which will change a lot, exactly the things that have to change. To be less dependent, more independent, more autonomous in our decisions. And especially this year, which runs up now of 2021, showed us showed us a lot of examples for dependency, which harms us, which leads to lacks of opportunities for us as Europeans. These are things which will change, and there are a lot of things like wealth, like peace, like freedom, like rule of law, like democracy, which must not change. And we must do our utmost that they will not change. And that's why we have to change a lot of structures and to reshape the European structures in order to provide also future generations with these privileges and with these main pillars of a proper living in dignity and in freedom.
Mr. Wieland, Mr. Gozi, Mr. Mandl, thank you very much for your expertise. Good luck, and may the European Federation be.
Thank you.
All the best. Take care, and Merry Christmas from my side.
And Merry Christmas, yes.
Merry Christmas. Bye. Was a real pleasure. Thank you, Rainer. Thank you, Lukas. Bye-bye.
Union of European Federalists.